You might want to stop that machine before it costs you $9 million. Vanessa Whitmore actually laughed when I said it. At 6:03 that Tuesday morning, the first steel tooth of a yellow excavator punched through the cedar roof of my father's cabin, and the sound ripped across the Colorado foothills like a tree splitting in winter. I woke to diesel engines growling outside my window, and the sharp smell of fresh-cut pine drifting through the cold morning air. By the time I pulled on my boots and crossed the gravel driveway, half the porch was already folded into itself. Boards cracked. Glass rattled. A backup alarm kept chirping through the dust. Beep, beep, beep. Vanessa stood 20 yards away beside a white SUV, holding a paper coffee cup in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Blonde hair perfect. Cream jacket spotless. Not one speck of sawdust on her. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, like we had bumped into each other at a grocery store. "I assume you received the notices." I stared past her at the excavator. "My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 43 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life working around grading crews, drainage systems, access roads, and construction sites. I know what heavy equipment can do. I also know what paperwork is supposed to exist before somebody puts a bucket through another man's building." "Shut it down," I told her. Vanessa took a slow sip of coffee. "Silver Pines has authorization to remove the structure. It's inside the development safety corridor." She handed me a permit packet. The paper was still warm from whatever printer had produced it. Behind her, another section of roof disappeared into a cloud of pale dust. I could smell hydraulic fluid now, mixed with crushed cedar and mountain air. I wanted to look at the cabin. Instead, I looked at the permit. Vanessa expected shouting. She expected threats. Maybe that was why her smile disappeared when I became quiet. I checked the contractor name, then the authorization date, then the parcel number. I read that number twice. Something was wrong. I didn't tell her what. I folded the papers once and slipped them under my arm. Then I walked toward the edge of the property, where orange survey stakes had appeared overnight. One stood beside an old drainage culvert my father installed decades ago. Half buried in weeds near it was a weathered metal plaque I had seen 1,000 times as a kid and never thought much about. "Private access and watershed easement, 1987. Vanessa called after me. "Ethan, this doesn't need to become difficult." I brushed dirt from the plaque with my thumb and looked back at the machine chewing through the cabin my father had built with his own hands. Then I looked at her $9 million development stretching beyond the trees. New pavement, fresh foundations, construction trailers, trucks already rolling toward the site. Vanessa thought the cabin was the obstacle standing in her way. At 6:03 that morning, neither of us fully understood what that old metal plaque was about to do. But I understood one thing she didn't. Her permit had the wrong parcel number. That wrong parcel number stayed in my head while the excavator kept working. But to understand why it mattered, you have to understand what Vanessa had been trying to get from me for the previous 6 weeks. My father, Walter Cole, bought those 11 acres in 1987, back when Silver Pines was nothing but lodgepole pine, granite, and a narrow county road that disappeared under snow every winter. Dad ran excavation equipment for 32 years. He built retaining walls, drainage channels, ranch roads, and foundations all over that part of Colorado. The cabin was his weekend project. 600 square feet of cedar siding, a stone chimney, and a porch facing west toward the mountains. Nothing about it was fancy. That was the point. I learned to drive a pickup on that gravel lane. I learned to read a survey map at the kitchen table. Dad kept rolled plats in a battered green metal box that smelled like machine oil and old paper. Whenever I complained that property markers made no sense, he would tap the map with one rough finger and say, "Never trust the fence, Ethan. Trust the survey." After he passed, the cabin and land came to me. By then I had spent more than 20 years working as a civil site contractor, so I maintained the drainage, cleared dead timber, and kept the access road graded. Then Silver Pines Estates started expanding along my eastern boundary. At first, I barely noticed. Survey crews appeared, then dump trucks, then signs advertising luxury mountain townhomes, a private clubhouse, a heated pool, and what their glossy brochure called an exclusive alpine lifestyle. The entire expansion was valued at roughly $9 million. Vanessa Whitmore introduced herself 3 weeks after construction started. She pulled into my driveway in a white sport utility vehicle and stepped out carrying a leather folder. Your cabin creates a visual continuity issue, she told me. I remember the smell of her coffee mixing with pine sap warming in the afternoon sun. Visual continuity? I asked. Silver Pines has architectural standards. I am not in Silver Pines. Her smile tightened. She opened the folder anyway. Inside were photographs of my cabin, my fence, even my woodpile. A week later came the first notice. Exterior stain noncompliance. Then roof appearance. Then vegetation management. Every envelope carried the Silver Pines logo, as if printing it on expensive paper somehow extended their authority across my property line. I answered each one the same way. My parcel was privately owned and outside the homeowners association. That should have ended it. Instead, orange survey stakes began appearing closer to my driveway. Construction trucks started using the turnoff beside my drainage culvert. Then Vanessa sent a certified letter claiming my cabin interfered with a newly designated development safety corridor. That phrase bothered me. So did the map attached to it. My eastern boundary had somehow moved almost 40 feet west. I called Vanessa immediately. Your map is wrong. She gave a small laugh. Our engineers disagree. I looked through my kitchen window toward the old culvert and the weathered easement plaque beyond it. Then your engineers should find an older map. There was silence for half a second. Then her voice changed. Colder. Progress requires cooperation, Ethan. I should have realized right then that Vanessa was never trying to enforce neighborhood standards. She needed something on my land. And whatever it was, my father's cabin was standing directly in the way. 3 days after that phone call, I learned exactly what Vanessa meant by cooperation. A black sport utility vehicle from Silver Pines rolled onto my gravel drive just after 7 in the morning, followed by a pickup carrying 2 surveyors in orange vests. I was standing beside my workbench with coffee in my hand when I heard tires grinding over stone. By the time I stepped outside, one surveyor was driving a bright orange stake into the ground 20 feet inside the boundary my father had taught me to recognize. Tap, tap, tap. The sound carried through the cold mountain air. Morning, I said. The younger surveyor stopped immediately. The older one looked down at his tablet. We are marking the construction corridor. On whose property? He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than his answer. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later wearing dark sunglasses and carrying the same leather folder. She walked directly toward the new stakes, as if she were inspecting something she already owned. This corridor provides temporary access for construction vehicles, she said. I pointed toward the county road. You already have construction access. Not adequate access. There it was. The first honest sentence she had given me. The main entrance to Silver Pines came around the north side of the ridge, almost a mile from the expansion site. Concrete trucks had to climb a steep switchback before reaching the new foundations. My land offered something better. A nearly level route from the county road directly to the development, passing beside the cabin and over the old drainage culvert. It could save trucks time, fuel, and thousands of dollars in site work. Suddenly the notices made sense. The cabin was not hurting their view. It was blocking their shortcut. I pulled out my phone and photographed every stake. Vanessa watched me. Those markers are authorized. Then you will have paperwork showing the authorization. Our attorneys have reviewed everything. I smiled. That was not what I asked. Her jaw tightened. 2 days later, trucks started using the turnoff anyway. First a utility pickup, then a dump truck, then a concrete mixer that rolled past my fence before sunrise, its engine rumbling hard enough to shake the coffee cup on my kitchen counter. I documented each vehicle. Date, time, company name, license plate. I sent Vanessa a written notice telling Silver Pines to stop using my property until ownership and access rights were resolved. Her response arrived that afternoon. She claimed the route fell within an existing easement benefiting the development. That word caught my attention. Easement. I walked down to the culvert before sunset. Pine needles covered the old metal plaque, and runoff water whispered through the pipe beneath my boots. Private access and watershed easement, 1987. I crouched there for a long moment. Vanessa was right about one thing. An easement existed. But my father had taught me enough to know that an easement was not ownership. It came with boundaries, conditions, responsibilities. Somewhere, there had to be an agreement explaining exactly what Silver Pines could use and what they could not touch. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. The room smelled like dust, toner, and old cardboard. A clerk named Linda helped me pull the archived property records. 40 minutes later, she placed a scanned document on the screen. I recognized my father's signature immediately. Then I saw the legal description attached to it. The access corridor was real, but it was narrower than Vanessa's new map. Much narrower. And right beside the drainage clause was a sentence that made me sit completely still. Any material alteration to the coal parcel required prior written consent from the property owner. Vanessa had never asked for mine. I left the county records office with 12 printed pages, one certified copy, and the uncomfortable feeling that Vanessa had already gone farther than I knew. The afternoon sun flashed against my windshield as I drove back toward the foothills, but all I could see was that sentence in my father's agreement. Prior written consent from the property owner. Mine. Silver Pines could use a narrow section of the original easement for limited access, but they could not widen it, relocate it, alter the drainage system, remove permanent improvements, or disturb the surrounding parcel without permission. I had given them none. When I reached the property, a fresh layer of gravel had been spread beside the culvert. Tire tracks crossed the ground where pine needles had been that morning. I parked, stepped out, and heard a diesel engine climbing toward me. A dump truck came around the bend and rolled straight across the disputed section. Gravel snapped under its tires. I raised my phone and recorded everything. The driver slowed. They told us this was approved access. Who told you? I asked. He pointed toward the development. Site office. I thanked him and moved aside. The driver was not my problem. The paperwork was. That evening I scanned every page from the county file and sent Vanessa a formal notice stating that no consent had been granted for alteration of my parcel. I copied the development company and requested the legal document they believed authorized their expanded corridor. Vanessa answered less than an hour later. Your interpretation is incorrect. Silver Pines intends to proceed under its recorded access rights. No explanation. No supporting document. Just confidence wrapped in a sentence. The next morning, 2 more orange stakes appeared. One was less than 15 feet from the cabin porch. I pulled it from the ground, photographed the hole, then placed the stake beside my garage. By noon, Vanessa was standing at my door. Her perfume reached me before her voice did. Removing survey markers creates unnecessary complications. So does placing them on property you do not control. She opened her folder and handed me a new site plan. The line labeled Temporary Construction Corridor ran directly beside the cabin, widened across the drainage area, then curved toward the new townhome foundations. This is the approved plan, she said. I studied the lower corner. Revision date. Engineering stamp. Parcel references. There it was again. The same wrong number I had seen later on the demolition permit. At the time, I did not yet know how important that mistake would become. I only knew the number did not belong to my 11 acres. Where did you get this boundary? I asked. Vanessa folded her arms. From professionals. Then one of your professionals has a problem. Her smile disappeared. Ethan, the project is already financed. Contractors are scheduled. Buyers are waiting. You are not going to stop progress because of an old cabin and a technical disagreement. The wind pushed dry pine needles across the porch between us. I looked past her toward the Silver Pines construction cranes above the trees. Then show me the document with my signature. She said nothing. That silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it told me everything. Vanessa closed her folder. You will receive further notice. She walked back to her vehicle, heels clicking against the gravel. The next notice arrived 2 days later by certified mail. It called the cabin an unauthorized obstruction within an emergency access corridor and gave me 72 hours to remove it. I read the letter twice, set it beside my father's certified easement agreement, and noticed something almost absurd. Their deadline expired at 6 o'clock Tuesday morning. That was when I realized Vanessa was not preparing to negotiate. She was preparing to make the cabin disappear. Monday night, I left the certified letter on my kitchen table beside my father's easement agreement and did something Vanessa probably never expected. I went to bed. I had already photographed the cabin from every side, recorded the survey stakes, copied the county documents, and backed everything up in 2 places. At 5:48 Tuesday morning, diesel engines woke me before my alarm did. Headlights moved through the pine trees outside my bedroom window. By 6 o'clock, a flatbed trailer, an excavator, and 2 contractor pickups were parked near the cabin. The air smelled like cold dirt, exhaust, and wet cedar. Vanessa arrived 3 minutes later. That was the moment everything from the previous weeks finally collided. I called the county sheriff's non-emergency number while walking toward the crew. A deputy named Aaron Mills arrived about 20 minutes later, calm and professional, his boots crunching over the gravel as Vanessa hurried toward him with her folder already open. She showed him the demolition authorization. I showed him my deed, the certified easement agreement, and the boundary survey. He studied both sets of documents for several minutes. "This looks like a civil property dispute," he finally said. "I cannot determine ownership boundaries from the roadside." Vanessa smiled immediately. "Thank you, Deputy." I held up the demolition authorization. "The parcel number is not mine." Deputy Mills looked at it again. "That needs to be reviewed by the issuing office." "Then tell them to stop until it is reviewed." He shook his head slightly. "I cannot cancel a county document from here." That was the lowest moment of the morning. The paperwork I knew was wrong was still enough to keep the crew moving until someone with the right authority examined it. Vanessa stepped closer. "You had 72 hours, Ethan." Behind her, the excavator bucket lowered into another section of cedar roof. Wood cracked. Dust rolled across the clearing. I could smell the old pine boards my father had cut nearly 40 years earlier. I wanted to argue. Instead, I took out my phone. I photographed the excavator number, the contractor logo, the time, the orange stakes, the drainage culvert, every movement near the easement. Vanessa watched me like I was wasting my time. "Document whatever makes you feel better," she said. "By tonight, nobody will even remember that shack was here." I looked at her. "You should hope they do." By 7:30, most of the cabin was down. The stone chimney remained, along with part of the porch and a scattered line of cedar boards. That was when I saw something metallic beneath a pile of pine needles near the culvert. I walked over and pulled out the weathered plaque. "Private access and watershed easement. 1987. Dirt filled the stamped letters. I wiped them clean with my thumb, and my father's voice came back so clearly I could almost hear him standing beside me. "Never trust the fence. Trust the survey." I looked from the plaque to the excavator, then toward the construction road silver pines had widened across my land. The old agreement did more than restrict access. It protected the drainage system itself. I went inside, opened the green metal document box, and spread every page across the kitchen table. Survey, deed, easement, drainage specifications. Then I found the clause I had overlooked at the county office. If the drainage protections were materially altered without owner consent, temporary access rights could be suspended pending inspection. I read it 3 times. Outside, Vanessa was celebrating the removal of an obstacle. Inside, I finally understood what she had actually removed, her own permission to keep using the route. At 8:12 that morning, while the demolition crew loaded broken cedar onto a trailer outside, I made one phone call. Not to Vanessa, not to the Homeowners Association. I called the County Planning and Development Office and asked for Martin Keller, a senior site compliance inspector I had worked with years earlier on a commercial drainage project. I did not ask him for a favor. I asked him where to send evidence of a possible permit discrepancy involving a recorded easement and an active construction corridor. His answer was simple. Send everything. I did. The certified deed went first. Then the 1987 survey, the easement agreement, the drainage specifications, photographs of the orange stakes, timestamps showing construction vehicles crossing the property, and the demolition authorization with the wrong parcel number. I included photographs from before sunrise and another set taken after the crew altered the ground beside the culvert. At 8:41, the files were gone from my computer and sitting in the county system. Then I called the engineering office listed on Vanessa's site plan. A project coordinator named Rachel Monroe answered. I gave her the revision number printed in the lower corner and asked her to verify the parcel used for the temporary corridor. Her keyboard clicked for several seconds. "That corridor references parcel 17B, she said. I looked at my deed. "My property is parcel 17C. Silence. More typing. "Mr. Cole, I need to review this with our project engineer." "Please do." I hung up and stared through the kitchen window. The excavator was idling now. Vanessa stood beside the contractor's truck, talking with 2 men in clean jackets and hard hats. She looked relaxed, almost pleased. At 9:17, my phone rang. Rachel again. Her voice had changed. "We are placing our corridor certification under internal review. Can you send the recorded legal description you mentioned?" I sent it before she finished the sentence. By 10:30, I had assembled a second evidence package for the County Road and Drainage Division. The old agreement required the culvert and watershed channel to remain within specified elevations. I walked outside with a 25-foot tape measure, photographed the disturbed shoulder, and documented the fresh gravel spread beyond the historic access width. I did not move anything. I did not block the road. I simply recorded what was there. Vanessa noticed. "Still taking pictures?" she called. "Yes. You know construction continues this afternoon." "I know." She walked closer, lowering her voice. "You are making this much more expensive than it needs to be." I looked toward the development beyond the pines. Concrete forms stood along the ridge. Trucks moved between stacks of lumber. The whole place hummed with money already committed. "That is exactly why you should have checked the parcel number." For the first time, Vanessa did not have an immediate answer. At 11:56, Martin called me back. He had reviewed enough to see 3 separate questions: whether the demolition authorization matched the correct parcel, whether the temporary access exceeded the recorded easement, and whether recent grading had altered protected drainage conditions. He could not give me a conclusion over the telephone, but he said something that changed the temperature of the entire day. "Do not interfere with the site, Ethan. We are sending inspectors." I looked at the clock above my stove. It was not even noon. At 3:42 that afternoon, 2 county vehicles turned onto my gravel drive, and Vanessa stopped smiling. I was standing near what remained of the porch when I saw them coming through the pines. White sport utility vehicles with county seals on the doors, followed by a survey pickup carrying equipment in the bed. Martin Keller stepped out of the first vehicle with a tablet under his arm. Beside him was a drainage inspector named Thomas Reed. Neither man looked interested in anyone's opinion. They looked interested in measurements. Martin shook my hand once. "Show me the original markers." I led them to the eastern boundary without saying anything about Vanessa. The old iron survey pin was still where my father had shown it to me years ago, several feet beyond the line Silver Pines had marked. Thomas walked toward the culvert and crouched beside the fresh gravel. He measured the channel, photographed the disturbed shoulder, then compared the location to the drainage specifications I had sent that morning. A few minutes later, Vanessa came down from the development in her white sport utility vehicle. She parked beside the county trucks and walked toward us quickly, leather folder pressed against her side. "I am Vanessa Whitmore, president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association," she announced. Martin looked up from his tablet. "Good afternoon. There appears to be some confusion regarding our authorized construction corridor. That is what we are determining." Vanessa opened her folder. "Our engineering team approved this alignment." Martin held out his hand. "May I see the stamped plan?" She gave it to him. He studied the lower corner, then looked at me. "Mr. Cole, your parcel is 17C?" "Yes." Martin turned the plan toward Vanessa and tapped the printed legal description. "This references 17B. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere uphill, a concrete truck shifted gears. Vanessa stared at the page. "That is an administrative typo." Thomas stood up from the culvert. "The drainage measurements are not a typo." He showed Martin several photographs on his tablet. Fresh gravel extended beyond the recorded access width, and the shoulder elevation had changed near the protected channel. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Nothing significant has been altered." Thomas pointed toward the demolished cabin site. "Who authorized work on this parcel?" "We had a valid removal order." Martin asked the question again, slower this time. "Who authorized demolition on parcel 17C?" Vanessa glanced toward me. For the first time all day, she looked uncertain. "Our legal team handled the documentation." Martin checked his tablet. "The demolition authorization in the county system references 17B as well." Vanessa reached for her phone. "I need to call our attorney." "You should," Martin said. Then he walked toward the construction entrance. We followed him about 200 yards uphill, where the temporary corridor opened into the Silver Pines expansion. The noise grew louder with every step. Engines, backup alarms, compressors, workers calling across the site. Nearly $9 million of scheduled construction moving on a route that was suddenly under review. Martin stopped beside the first concrete staging area and spoke with the site superintendent, a broad-shouldered man named Greg Palmer. Greg listened, looked toward Vanessa, then pulled a radio from his belt. Within minutes, trucks stopped entering through my property. Vanessa came toward me while Martin and Thomas continued inspecting the corridor. "Do you understand what you are doing?" she asked quietly. I looked at the orange stakes, the disturbed drainage shoulder, and the empty place where my father's cabin had stood that morning. I understand exactly what I am doing. Behind her, a survey technician set a tripod over the old iron pin and began taking readings. A few seconds later, Martin called Vanessa's name. When she turned around, he was holding the stamped plan in one hand and my father's 1987 survey in the other. We have a boundary conflict, he said. And until we resolve it, nobody expands this corridor another inch. By 5:20 that afternoon, the mountain light had turned gold, and the entire Silver Pines expansion sounded different. Not quieter yet, but uncertain. Engines idled longer than they should. Workers stood beside parked equipment waiting for instructions. A concrete truck sat near the temporary corridor with its mixer turning slowly, but nobody waved it forward. Martin and Thomas had spent more than an hour comparing the recorded easement to the measurements from the survey crew. The result was not close. Silver Pines had widened the usable corridor beyond the recorded boundary, changed the grade near the drainage channel, and relied on a site plan tied to the wrong parcel. Then Martin showed me something I had not noticed. The demolition authorization did not merely contain the wrong parcel number. Its legal description matched a vacant strip of land east of mine. On paper, the county had authorized work somewhere else. At 5:47, Greg Palmer, the site superintendent, walked down from the construction trailer holding his phone. His face had lost all the confidence I had seen that morning. Our project engineer pulled the corridor certification, he told Vanessa. Until the boundary issue is cleared, they will not stand behind the current plan. Vanessa stared at him, then used the north entrance. Greg shook his head. Not for the scheduled concrete deliveries. The switchback does not meet the temporary hall configuration in the active logistics plan. Change the plan. That requires review. Vanessa looked toward Martin. How long? Martin did not answer immediately. He was reading something on his tablet. At 6:18, he walked to the construction trailer carrying a bright notice in a clear weatherproof sleeve. The remaining engines seemed louder as he crossed the gravel. Vanessa followed him. So did Greg. I stayed several yards back. Martin attached the notice beside the site permit board and pressed each corner flat. Effective immediately, he said. Work dependent on the disputed access and drainage approvals is suspended pending compliance review. Greg lifted his radio. One message went out, then another. The change moved across the site like a switch being flipped. A loader stopped first, then a compactor, then the excavator near the new clubhouse shut down. One by one, the backup alarms disappeared. The concrete truck at the corridor entrance turned around and headed back toward the county road. Within minutes, the $9 million expansion that had been roaring since sunrise became strangely still. Wind moved through the pine branches. Somewhere near the old cabin site, loose plastic sheeting fluttered against a stack of lumber. Vanessa stood beneath the permit board reading the notice again. Then she turned and walked toward me. Her coffee was gone. Her folder was gone. Even her posture had changed. You shut down $9 million over an old cabin? She asked. Her voice was low enough that only I could hear it. I looked past her at the silent equipment, then down the hill toward the disturbed culvert and the weathered metal plaque resting on the hood of my truck. No, Vanessa. I pointed toward the orange stakes she had ordered placed across my property. You shut it down over land you never owned. She stared at me without answering. Behind her, Martin was speaking with Greg about the documents required before any work could resume. Corrected parcel records, a new boundary verification, drainage review, revised access approval, owner consent where the easement required it. Mine. The sun dropped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the empty construction corridor. That morning, Vanessa had stood beside an excavator and told me nobody would remember my father's cabin by nightfall. Now every machine on her project was silent because the paperwork attached to that cabin had become impossible to ignore. The silence did not last one evening. It lasted 23 days. During that time, Silver Pines had to submit a corrected boundary survey, a revised drainage assessment, and a new construction access plan. The engineering firm formally withdrew the original corridor drawing after confirming that Parcel 17B had been used where Parcel 17C should have appeared. The county also determined that the demolition authorization had never applied to my property. That finding changed everything. Vanessa could no longer call what happened a technical disagreement. The Homeowners Association had authorized work on land it did not own using paperwork tied to another parcel. My attorney, Daniel Brooks, sent preservation notices to the association, the developer, and the demolition contractor. I did not ask for revenge. I asked for the cabin to be valued, the disturbed ground restored, the drainage system repaired to county standards, and every future access request to follow the recorded easement. The developer responded first. They wanted distance from Vanessa and a solution that would get construction moving again. Within 2 weeks, their attorney proposed a settlement covering the cabin, restoration costs, survey expenses, and my legal fees. I accepted only after the agreement stated in plain language that Silver Pines had no ownership interest in my 11 acres. The Homeowners Association board held an emergency meeting the following Thursday. I did not attend, but 3 residents called me afterward. Vanessa was removed as president by a board vote. Her replacement sent me a written apology and withdrew every violation notice Silver Pines had ever issued against my property. The project eventually resumed, but not through the shortcut Vanessa wanted. The developer redesigned its construction logistics around the north entrance and paid to restore the shoulder beside my culvert. The orange stakes disappeared. The fresh gravel was removed from the protected area. A county surveyor reset the boundary markers, and this time nobody argued about where the line belonged. That fall, I started rebuilding. I did not try to recreate my father's cabin board for board. Some things should not be copied. They should be remembered. I built a smaller cedar place on the same western view, set safely inside the confirmed boundary, with a porch facing the mountains just like the old one. I saved one weathered beam from the original structure and mounted it above the fireplace. The brass key from my father's green document box hangs beneath it. And outside, near the restored culvert, I cleaned the old metal plaque until every stamped letter could be read again. One cold October morning, I fastened it to a cedar post. The hammer made a clean metallic sound against the mounting bolt. Clang. I stopped for a second because it reminded me of that Tuesday morning, only everything around me was different now. No diesel engines. No backup alarms. No orange stakes. Just wind moving through the pines and water running quietly beneath the road. I thought about my father sitting at that kitchen table decades earlier, teaching me to read lines on a survey that seemed meaningless to a kid. Never trust the fence. Trust the survey. Vanessa had believed authority came from a title, a folder, and enough confidence to make other people step aside. My father understood something simpler. Property does not belong to whoever speaks the loudest. Rights do not disappear because somebody finds them inconvenient. Justice did not arrive with shouting or spectacle. It arrived with a survey, a signature, and a property line they should never have crossed.